Black people worldwide suffer from an identity crisis. Though this is a much more severe problem in the United States, it is something that you will see anywhere that assimilationism and integrationalism is the norm. Now, this self-hatred produces a lot of movements rooted in conspiracy theories. They range from the Moors, many One West affiliated Hebrew Israelite groups, and the Black Aborigines that are typically opposed to Afrocentrism and African identity. This identity crisis extends to the Pan-Africanist in name only, or Panos, who call themselves Pan-Africanist while promoting ethnocentrism. Though they may be right and exact when it comes to identifying with Africa, their West African-centric conception of history is completely distorted and false. One of the main points that these individuals articulate is that our conception of Africa that originates with the study of classical African civilization is European. While it is true that the Africa we were given on maps came from European imperialist cartographers, and that there was never a conceptualization of a West Africa versus East Africa dichotomy in antiquity, the research of Dr. Theophilo Benga has demonstrated that our ancestors definitely made maps. In pre-colonial Africa, hunters, fishermen, travelers, and traders knew a great deal about their surrounding geographical environment. According to Henri Labouré, the Lobi people of Burkina Faso were able to draw topographical diagrams in the sand, showing houses as well as salient features by using stones of various sizes and indicating waterways by placing wisps of straw or twigs of millet. The Turin Papyrus map, the oldest multicolored topographic and geological map in the world, depicts the Wadi Hammamat mine between the Hapi River and the Eritrean Sea. This map is oriented using the direction of the flow of the river in the Great Lakes region as the northern datum. Using this standard, a more accurate African-centered conceptualization of the continent would look like this. One consistently false claim made by these ethnocentrists who seek to negate the shared history of all African people is that West Africans are ethnically homogeneous, distinct, and have a separate historical origin from the rest of Africa. The advocates of this false idea attack the historical comparative analysis used in the Afrikology subfields of Kemetology and Nubiology. Their detractions are rooted in the absolutely absurd notion that African-centered historiography represents the Hamitic Hypothesis painted black. They completely misunderstand the origin and the purpose of Hamiticism, and are African scholars who refuted it. The 11th century Rabbi Solomon ben Isaac was the first one to connect the curse of Canaan in Genesis 9:21 of the Bible to racist ideas about African people under the designation of Hamite. From this point until the late 18th century, the Hamites were considered black, and the curse of Ham was routinely used to justify slavery and rationalize the expansion of Eurasian imperialist economies at the expense of Africa. Though there were a few scholars such as Duvalny and Vivien Devant who accepted the fact that the civilizations of classical Africa in Kemi and Kush were built by black people, this all changed in the late 18th and early 19th century upon the invasion of ancient Kemi by Napoleon. The exposure of the technical and civilizational greatness of Kemi gave racist scholars the impetus to change the Hamites from black to white in order to justify their imperial project. This is when the modern version of the Hamitic Hypothesis was born. Here, white pastoralists from West Asia are made responsible for civilizing Africa. This racist legacy is exhibited with the statue of Champollion standing on the head of the Nasut. Karl Lepsius was the father of Hamitic Linguistics, and he is a well-known Prussian Egyptologist. He had a long legacy and greatly influenced the work of Wilhelm Bleek, who established the Bantu language family. Karl Meinhof is another Hamiticist who comes from this tradition. He is known as the founding father of Niger-Congo, which he called Sudanic. Diedrich Westermann, another Hamiticist, continued this research and further solidified Sudanic as Niger-Congo. Friedrich Müller is a linguist who formulated the Hamito-Semitic language family, also called Afro-Asiatic. It is clear that the opponents of the falsely alleged Hamiticism in classical Africana studies, who identify themselves as Niger-Congo, Bantu, Afro-Asiatic, etc., are using linguistic categories that were established by Hamiticist linguists. Linguistics isn't the only area where these ethnic chauvinists borrow from Europeans. Their entire historical approach comes from the Western world. from the sense of history articulated by Procopius, to historical identity formulated by Petrarch, and even historiography that was defined by Campanella. Outside of an African-centered approach, all lessons and methods promoted by these varied covert assimilationists under the guise of ethnic nationalism originated in the Western world. So what did our Igbo, Wolof, Yoruba, Akan, Tikar, and Igala ancestors say about their origins? The vast majority of them state that they migrated from the east in the direction of the Happy River. The archaeological record validates these oral histories when we take the chronology of material industries into account, as well as the human occupation record. All of the material industries in Africa, from the early Stone Age to the Middle Stone Age to the Late Stone Age, originate in Eastern Africa before spreading to Central and Western Africa. According to the research of McIntosh, from 18,000 to 13,000 years before present, the majority of West Africa north of the 11-degree northern latitude was uninhabited. The Mali and Sahara occupation period dates back to 5000 to 4500 BCE. The oldest occupation date for Dartichet Walata is around 2000 BCE. These massive periods of time lacking human occupation make it unlikely that the cultures of West Africa developed in isolation without external input from other regions of the continent. This means that there were numerous periods of time when our ancestors were migrating in and out of West Africa, especially along the Sahelian belt. There is absolutely no evidence that the oral histories of African people were forcefully changed by Eurasians. In reality, the rise of Islam in Western Africa influenced our ancestors to edit certain elements of their folklore for geopolitical purposes. This is confirmed by Zatranuk in his refutation of Afigbo's assertion that there was a heavy amount of Eurasian influence in the construction of Igbo historiography, as well as Law's affirmation of surface-level altering as opposed to major changes to the core narratives of African history. In order to accurately understand the dynamics of African oral histories, we must comprehend the nature of the inferences used within African logic and philosophy. According to Dr. Jonathan Chimakonam, African logic is conversational and diunital, meaning that it deals with both and propositions, as opposed to either or propositions, by validating them with respect to the context that they appear. Though a Western theologian may see Nyame of the Akan and Yahweh of the Bible as different entities, to the African, the concept of the transcendent one as existence itself needs no naming convention. The esoteric levels of African philosophical systems are indeterminate and unstable. They often contradict exoteric knowledge and function as a vehicle to transfer power. Metaphoric terms in African oral testimonies place ideas about language and symbolism in pragmatic analysis, locating dominant symbols, schemes, and ritual speech genres in the context of their production. These oral testimonies can be understood by focusing on specific speech acts, locatives, pronomial shifting, and cultural ideas about linguistic performance. In this matter, spreading esoteric knowledge denotatively is indicative of a socio-political revolt against authoritative discourses that it challenges. It is absolutely not the case that the usage of popular figures in Abrahamic traditions as historical reference points in African oral testimonies makes them invalid. To the contrary, the metaphoric element of these figures in African migratory testimonies amplify folkloric narratives while preserving their integrity in light of the need to keep traditional socio-political institutions intact. It is very easy to validate the oral histories of African people using a pluridisciplinary approach. This methodology, established at the UNESCO conference at Cairo in 1974, bypasses the false charges of hyperdiffusionism and migrationism rooted in monocausal archeological methodology. Contemporary Afrikologists use a multivariate approach that combines processualist methods in archaeometrics as well as semiotic analysis rooted in historical comparative linguistics. The Mulongi model of Dr. Dika Akwa uses a historical spatio-temporal methodology using the principle of juxtaposition to compare and contrast entities with respect to space and fractality. The superposition principle, which employs diachronic analysis to stratify systems chronologically. The totalization principle, which contextualizes systems with respect to historical precedent. And the subsumption principle, which harmonizes phenomena in light of customary validity and formal soundness. Through this methodological rigor, we can corroborate the migratory histories of Africa in various fields of knowledge. Recent ancient DNA analysis at Shum Laka in Cameroon shows that contemporary West African populations are no more than 3,000 years old, and they replace diminutive Twa people who inhabited West Africa before them. This corroborates classical testimonies given by Herodotus that affirm that West Africa was dominated by these Twa as late as the 15th century before the Common Era. It also corroborates with Dr. Boubacar Sall's archaeogenetic research citing a 5th millennia BCE Sahelian migratory ancestry of ancient Kush. Because ancient Kemi and West Africa existed in the same cultural substratum, there are also numerous commonalities between the divine kingship, matrifocal filiation, and the mode of production of both civilizations. With historical comparative linguistics, we can provide a genetic relationship between different African populations by analyzing the basic vocabulary of their languages and finding recurrent, non-accidental sound correspondences. Historically, African scholars have applied this methodology in a variety of spaces. Obenga used lexical series to show that most of the languages of Africa are related, and that Remen-Kimi, the language of ancient Kemet, is not genetically related to Semitic. This was a major blow to Hamitic linguists and the origin of the Negro-Egyptian language family. Gilbert and Gome expanded on Obenga's methodology, further solidifying this genetic relationship between Douala, Coptic, Classical Met-Remen-Kimi, and other languages of Inner Africa. Diop and Dika Akwa have provided extensive evidence of toponymy correspondences using this historical linguistic evidence. Cambone's research on body part expressions in Inner Africa affirmed the structural relationship between the Egypto-African language family. Dr. Musa Lamb's hydronomical and hydrographical research shows linguistic commonalities in the naming conventions of the waterways on the Sahelian belt, from the Senegal River to the Happy River Valley, demonstrating a pathway of travel, validating Greek and Arab references of a western branch of the Happy River. Both Oxford and UNESCO have confirmed that these particular waterways existed parallel to the trade routes that our ancestors used to conduct commerce across the Sahelian belt and the Green Sahara in antiquity. As mentioned before, the first references to Sengambian history were done by Herodotus, detailing a waterway link between the western and eastern poles of the Sahel. El-Bekri wrote about the Gara people and Ngala in the 11th century. The oral tradition of Diaro Yao details 6 migratory journeys from the Happy River Valley from the 7th century BCE to contemporary times. They are the Dia-Ogo migration, the Mana migration, the Tondion migration, the Tormis migration, the Koli-Tongwela migration, and the Lam-Toro migration. Wolof is genetically related to Egypto-African languages. This was affirmed by Diop's analysis of phonological sound laws and verbal morphology between Wolof and Met-Remen-Kimi. This proves that there was a recent contact between the two cultures. There are structural commonalities between the megaliths and building systems of the Senegal River and Happy River Valley. Diop presented possible evidence of Carthaginian ancestry through the traditions of Nekau and Hana circumnavigating the African continent. This is also affirmed by Dr. Kaur in the Saharan Journal, published by the National Institute of African Studies. This allows us to conclude that there is definitely Remen-Kimi ancestry among the Wolof. The Ouagadougou people and their descendants in modern Ghana have similar origins. The Yerere tradition cites that the ancestors of the Cisse dynasty used waterways to travel from the Aswan area to the Oya River Valley and modern Ghana. Gyamfi's proposition of an isolated local origin of the Akan in the classical period in the area of the Amu Owi cave lacks the simple and complex correlates as well as the production context in dynamic systems analysis needed to demonstrate historical continuity in the material culture. It is also not supported by the previously cited ancient genetic studies, showing a modern origin of most West African groups. The research of Dr. Nasir Sar, showing commonalities in burial traditions along the Sahelian belt cultural complex, shows that the Kintampo settlement exists within this same substratum as ancient Kush and ancient Kemi. Boahen's research about the Akan emerging from the Chad-Benue Cradle at the midway point of the aforementioned Sahelian Waterway corroborate with this. Commonalities in wavy line pottery, grinding stones, pastoral techniques, and serial domestication across the region negate any attempt to separate these African civilizations on the behalf of material cultures. The fact that the Akan culture and the ancient culture of Kemi and Kush exist in the same cultural substratum is demonstrated in their divine kingship commonalities. Comparative linguistic analysis of the Egypto-African languages suggests a Happy River Valley origin of these populations. As mentioned previously, the assertion by Afikpo that the oral histories of Nigerian people were severely altered is simply untenable. Local edits to oral testimonies on the surface do not negate their central narratives. Afikpo's glottochronological analysis of a Proto-Niger-Congo origin of the Igbo people in the Oya-Chada area is invalid as a method in historical linguistics because the tempo of sound change is not constant. His proposal that Igbo belongs to the Akwa family carries the same weight from the Hamitic myth that he opposes in its origination from the Hamiticist linguist Gottlob Adolf Krauss. The claim of a historical and cultural Amanala continuity from the Afikpo culture to modern Igbo culture are also invalid, void of dynamic systems analysis in historical archaeology. We must also note that basic vocabulary is preferred over cultural items in the historical analysis and reconstruction of language families. There are numerous other references that affirm a long history between the Igbo and the Igala. The Igala arrived in the Oya-Chada area around 500 years before the Common Era. The Igala Ata lists 82 rulers that go back to 900 of the Common Era, starting with Amene. The Umu-Eri clans of Aguleri, Nteje, Amanuke, and Igbariam state that Eri was an Igala man. The Igala established dominion over Igbo settlements during the reign of Onojo Ogboni. The Ezi Nri Ora Eri is commonly depicted with the Igala Ejube pictorial mask. The Igala compendium cite Happy River Valley origins of their lineage. Robin Law's assertion that the documented traditions of the Yoruba originating from the East are solely rooted in ethnic nationalism is flawed, because he implies that British imperialism has a more positive effect on the civilizing of Africans. Ade Obayemi's glottochronological analysis of Yoruba ethnogenesis is void of the historical comparative method, and also utilizes a faulty methodology as stated previously. The Yoruba, as descendants of Aranmiyan, were engendered in the Oya-Chada area. Aranmiyan was a descendant of the Igala patriarch Muenya and the Wangara general Modi Soap, as documented by Dika Akwa. There are many philosophical and theological correspondences between the Yoruba and the Riemann Kimi, from the Ram divination system to the Ogdowan. The Obenga School of Historical Linguistics and Pluridisciplinary Analysis demonstrates phonetic regularity between Yoruba and Riemann Kimi. When supplemented by toponymy, genetic, theological, and structural systems analysis, we can confirm that the Yoruba people have origins in the Lutanzigi region of the Happy River Valley. It is easy to demonstrate that the claims pushed by West African ethnic chauvinists of a local independent ethnogenesis of West African people are completely false. There is an entire compendium of evidence within the body of Africana studies that shows a Happy River Valley origin for the majority of contemporary West African dynasties and cultures. This should not serve to divide us. It must serve to unite all African people and promote greater Pan-African unity. The Happy River Valley is not only the birthplace of humanity, it is a cultural cradle of the 21st century African Renaissance towards the development of our civilization and the dismissal of ethnocentric barbarism.